right, here we go. Welcome to Minhag Dirigo. Joining me again is my brother, Pastor Kevin Kresge, who, in addition to being my beloved sibling, is himself a Methodist pastor. Uh,
Indeed.
so, so Kevin, let me set the stage for tonight's discussion, because in this case, I want to avoid validating or invalidating certain things about the patristic era in Christianity as it relates to Jews. And I know we're going to get into it with Origin. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I'm like, that guy.
Yeah. Origin is the correct pronunciation. Yeah.
With Origin, one of the things that we're able to back into was a pretty significant refutation of Christian, his apologetics in response to a Greek dude that was like, "Hey, the Jews rejected Christ. Why should we take you seriously?" The starting point for this tonight is I personally don't like the historical assumption that Jewish rejection of Christ was really all that widespread. And it's not because like, hey, no, Christian, any other reason other than Christianity as a nascent religion was a very small piece of a wider set of schisms in
hmm
occupied Judea amongst Jews. And especially as they were scattered into diaspora at the end of the Roman Jewish War, and the New Testament covers two of those groups that we divided into the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And the third, of course, was the Essenes. And I think we talked about them before. The Sadducees, for our listeners that may not know, uh, derived from the word Sadakim in the Hebrew, were the priestly class. They were ostensibly descendants of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, who, of course, was Moses' brother and the first high priest. Uh, the temple in the time of Jesus was constructed in about 516 before Common Era, and it became the center of Jewish worship shortly thereafter. Its priests had influence on rulership, but it's not likely that these Sadducees that like existed in the time of Jesus traced their lineage beyond Alexander the Great's conquest. They probably originated not long before the time of Christ, probably during the Maccabean era. Uh,
hmm
and what we know of them and their beliefs comes primarily, like of a historical source, comes from Josephus or the Christian New Testament, and some disputes in the town captured in the Talmud with the Pharisees. The one key thing is that both Josephus and the Apostle Paul highlighted that unlike both the Pharisees and the Christians, the Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection of the dead. Um, the Pharisees are in the Hebrew Prushim, and I believe we can include Jesus as having some of their tradition, if any. They were far more popular with the Jews of the time. Uh,
hmm
Sometimes I wonder if, given the nature of the debate between Pharisees and Jesus, and this is just an aside, that it was a sign of his inclusion in their fold, because argument is the narrative mode in the Talmud and their theological search for truth. And I don't think that later non-Jewish writers would have understood that. And I think it even may be reinforced by Paul himself identifying as a Pharisee and the son of Pharisees very famously in Acts.
hmm
And also, we saw that the Pharisees were among believers because they were the ones that pressed for everybody to get circumcised.
Well, and I feel
Uh,
like to kind of tee off of that a little, I kind of feel like that's validated in a sense in some of in the New Testament when you read how Jesus would teach. His approach to discussion is very much the same as that argument format of not exactly the same as Paul's, where it was like um, almost like not quite straw man, um, you know, uh, where he'd kind of almost create a false argument and then argue against it and then like disprove it by like a hyperbole
yeah,
was more
very,
Paul's
very
method.
Talmudic, very
Yes,
Talmudic.
and
Yeah,
and Jesus is similar, but not to the level of hyperbole of Paul, I would say.
yeah, definitely
But he
not.
uses a lot of example, a lot of analogy, metaphor. But and so yeah, it teaches that same way. And then there's a lot of questioning.
Yeah,
So there's no it's so I don't know the answer to that question. It's never anything that's really set, but I mean the discussion and teaching methods are very similar.
yeah, and what's funny is the arguments. You have to wonder. The sympathies were there. I note that the Pharisees were the ones that came to Paul's defense when when he was in front of the Sanhedrin. Was it the Sanhedrin?
Um,
Uh, or somebody.
in
He was standing
I
for
mean,
judgment for something, and
he stood for judgment in Rome a couple of times. There were some times when he was held for judgment elsewhere, and they spoke not only of his heritage but also his citizenship, because he was a full Roman citizen,
so it's
as well as a
interesting.
Pharisee.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think, sometimes you read this and you wonder, there, nobody is calling the Pharisees a nest of vipers. There's debates over the legalism and all that stuff. And I wonder at times if they just captured an internal debate between peers when it came to the
Mm,
Pharisees, whereas, the Sadducees, everybody's just like, you guys suck.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well, and and some of that though is also, what the Sadducees were very focused on the temple,
yeah,
and they were not like the prevailing teachers in the synagogues.
yeah, that ship
So
had sailed at that point. It's
exactly. And I think maybe that's part of the reason why that was also like maybe the more popular teaching style of the
they were also
time.
aristocrats, and the
Yeah.
Pharisees, just like Jesus, were among the people. And
Yeah. I think they would complain even more about having to go on an assignment and be like the local rabbi
yeah,
in Galilee or Nazareth.
yeah,
Uh,
backwaters. Well,
yeah,
and
the
I
backwater.
sometimes wonder, like the non-Jewish inheritors of the church probably wouldn't have recognized that kind of debate for what it
No,
was,
no.
and inadvertently may have closed the door on a possibility of rapprochement with emerging rabbinical Judaism. But we'll never know.
Right.
What I did digress a little, and the groundwork for the Pharisees was laid with the destruction of the first temple and the 70-year Babylonian exile. That's when we started centering on study of Torah and
Hmm.
decentralizing worship from the temple cult and putting it more in the synagogue. The house of learning became the house of prayer. And
Hmm.
that evolved ultimately into what is today's Judaism. And then we had that third sect, the Essenes, or Isseim in Hebrew, uh, and they were possibly a branch of Sadducees who broke away over an illegitimate high priest. They were mystics and ascetics, and aside from the Dead Sea Scrolls, they didn't survive past the Roman-Jewish War, so they don't end up really being relevant to much of like either Christian or Jewish future. Really,
Yeah.
I'm sure there's
I
some
almost
scholars that.
I
I'm
almost
sorry.
feel like you could classify them as Gnostics as well, to a degree,
Yeah, yeah.
in the sense that there very much was secret knowledge, and you had to like earn your way into their group to be part of it. But also to their credit, I mean, all of the archaeological history that we have of Scripture now is really due in large part to their efforts in the Dead Sea region.
We think it
So,
was that. It may not have been them, which is fascinating. It
re-
may have,
really,
yeah, it may have been them and others. So it's
okay.
um, and where I'm going with all of this is that after the Bar Kokhba rebellion and the beginning of diaspora, the Jewish community was already in that state of flux. So and the most portable, and thanks to the Babylonian exile, the established and resilient form of Judaism was that decentralized format that was honed in exile. I think that we both, historically, I think we have that kind of, what is it? We're looking at it in retrograde from a modern perspective, and even
Hmm.
like 200 300 years into it, they were looking at it anachronistically and not really saying there. I don't think there was ever a calculated wholesale rejection of Christ or the early church, because we went to ground with a reinvention that had already been started prior to Christ. And
Hmm.
the rabbis were already embedded in our communities, and that's what we had. We were highly decentralized at that point. um, and 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 I wanted to lay that down before we got into the patristic era, because a lot of the patristic era was defined around uh, excising the Jewish elements of Christianity, and or the Jewish rejection of Christ, none of which were really, you know, they were talking to a wall. Where were we? We weren't around to, like, there. We were around to argue, but there was no centralized Jewish authority that could say, yes, we will accept Christ. No, we won't. Either way
Right.
around, there was just historically not possible.
Well,
Um,
and to be fair, even the early church had the same problem,
yeah,
in that it was primarily led by um, individuals,
Yeah.
who wrote to one another and really developed, like I mean, each of them had their own like polemics and like ideas towards like soteriology and everything, like like Christology, and you end up seeing, all those different opinions and everything in the writings that thankfully we still have
Yeah.
quite a large number of, that we can actually look back and at least, if not learn from it, also see how we got to where we are now.
And that's the leading question tonight. So we start with Celsus, who was a second century Greek philosopher, hostile to both Judaism and Christianity.
Oh yeah.
We were But importantly, and we know this because his book didn't survive, but he used the
Right.
Jewish rejection of Christ as the central argument to delegitimize early Christianity,
Hmm.
and that led to Origen's very well written refutation of that, and that's actually we can back into what Celsus wrote from his apologetic work. Um, but before he came along, Christianity was seen as just another regional folk religion, and he moved it into the realm of being like philosophically compatible with Plato and other Greek wisdom at the time. Um, but he was also the first one to introduce that ransom theory of atonement,
Hmm.
where Christ's death on the cross paid ransom to Satan in exchange for humanity's freedom. And this is the first question that I'll put to you tonight. This is
Yeah.
where does when and where did Christianity adopt the notion of Satan as a malevolent force?
So, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, there's a couple things there that I think come into play there is that what we see in scripture, um, that like the ransom redemption language narrative, like already exists in the New Testament. So we have that, but like the idea of Satan as like this adversary, accuser, um, it's, I mean, we know that like if we look at like the original language, obviously, Hasatan, accuser, adversary, not necessarily an individual malevolent force that's like necessarily like out to get you.
Yeah.
Uh, that we see though as you get into what Second Temple period that we start to see that more developed adversarial kind of demonic worldview, like with what Qumran, they had the whole Belial. I don't think I'm saying that right. Uh, was it Mastema?
Uh,
Uh,
Things they borrowed from prevailing
yeah,
culture around them. Yeah.
exactly. So like you kind of see some of that. And he certainly is the one who kind of coined the name Lucifer. Or origin is really kind of the origin of that. And it's borrowed word from the Vulgate, from Isaiah 14, where he takes that idea of the morning star, and it's out of that context of this taunt against the human king of Babylon. That it's not, sorry, the dog's tail. He hears, you end up hearing the drum beating in the background. That's the happy tail from the dog there. But we see that kind of then later be ascribed to that Hasatan adversarial thing. It's there's no how to put this. Um, we see in key scripture passages Job, Zechariah, um, First Chronicles. Of course, then you get into the New Testament, Matthew, Luke, Mark, where we've got the imagery of the fall. But going back, we've got Hasatan in Job as the accuser. Uh,
Yeah.
First Chronicles, we see David being incited by the accuser. We see then into the New Testament where you've got the more personal description. So we go from like that first Temple period into Second Temple period, where that whole borrowed ideology kind of has morphed now into um, a person. And so even looking back, you see them uh, kind of laying that over top of the older stories and having that be interpreted more as an individual. And we get
Acts.
then this like that fall imagery in the New Testament of Satan, and then of course if you go to Revelation 12, there's a whole aspect storytelling of the birth of Christ from the heavenly realms perspective rather than the earthly realms perspective, where you've got the dragon and Satan and all of that taking place. So, I mean, it's from a Wesleyan perspective. What I can say is that, like in the not even like modern, but even like going 18th century Wesleyan Methodism idea um, affirms that we see Satan as the accuser as a personal adversary, but not a rival God. And I feel like that is one of those things that you see in cult, like a lot of that borrowed imagery
Yeah.
is that there's that view of Satan as more of like a rival God, like as the anti-God in a way.
Yeah.
Um, and just we look at it like, yes, there is an accuser. Yes, we there is somebody. We feel like there is a force that comes against us. Uh, we see Satan in the New Testament presented as an adversary, accuser, deceiver, um, but one that is overcome by the sacrifice of Christ, the Christ's ministry, the cross, the resurrection, the redemption story. So I wouldn't say that Christianity invents Satan as a malevolent force, uh, because the New Testament kind of presupposes,
It's
and
interesting.
that's being written by the guys who were contemporaries of Christ.
Yeah, and it's
Uh,
interesting, like even in later prophets like Zechariah and his vision
mhm,
of Joshua the high priest, he Hasatan is an adversary or accuser,
mhm,
but he always acts under God's will.
right,
And now there will be Jews that will tell you that we don't have the concept of like demons and stuff like that in our theology, but that's actually not wholly true.
right,
We do have this whole concept in Kabbalah with the Sitra Achra, which is the kind of like the demonic realm,
mhm,
and it all hinges on whether or not as a Jew you think Kabbalah is a valid real thing. I'm one of those in the camp that I honor our Litvak Mitnagdim ancestors who weren't Hasidic and didn't go all in on Kabbalah and that stuff. Um, I don't believe in this stuff, but they also believe that Samael was the head of this and was
mhm,
married to Lilith. Um, but even there's no real theological importance attached to any of this for us. It's more like folklore.
right,
So it's interesting. Like yeah, we're like our concept of sin has always been disconnected from Satan. The concept of Satan in Judaism and being something that's purely the product of human recalcitrance and rejection of the covenant.
right.
It's
Well, and I know that like historically, um, and not that like Josephus is like the ultimate source of all history and is certainly not, while a reliable, right, fairly reliable source, is not always 100% accurate. Um, I mean, he talks about, ritual objects and divine names and using prayers to expel demons, right?
yeah,
As a tradition, uh, and documented it. And then, of course, like in Antiquities, he talks about that being a thing with Solomon, like Second Temple period. Well, First Temple period, rather. Sorry, and then that they were traditions of the day. So, I mean, I
yeah.
don't. That isn't to say that that is like, and this is not an effort to like refute or like
No,
argue.
no, no. It's
Just from a historical perspective, we know that it's absolutely not something that was only substantiated with the advent of Christianity and Jesus. It was something that culturally existed and was something that was, I don't know,
I
pervasive, but it
I
was
think it's
definitely
true.
something that existed culturally in the region, especially, and within, I would say, uh, within both religions at the time.
Yeah, the only thing I push back is I don't like. There's a big difference between folklore
Oh,
The
right.
and having any kind of theological significance. And
Yeah.
I have like we do have stories of demonic possession and things like that going back as far as
Well, and I think aren't there some Qumran scrolls that dealt with like they were not psalms, but they were like they were psalm-like and prayers that dealt with that were prayers to invoke God's power over evil spirits, and that I
quite
think they had
possibly,
recorded some of those.
quite
I'd
possibly,
have to
and
look.
yeah, yeah, and where the distinction comes in is that it still doesn't factor into any of this doesn't factor
Right,
into our relate. It's I even the prophets. It's here's the covenant. Don't worship other gods. Worship in the
right.
temple. Do these things. The theological significance of it just never manifests in a Jewish
Well,
thing.
exactly. I think it more, I guess the way more I see it is the it's almost like the you could almost liken it to the relationship between if we wanted to put it in like a modern world uh, political view.
Yeah,
You could almost compare it to the Americans and the British that were, cousins separated by a common language. We
yeah,
had so many historical similarities in terms of things that came out of uh, there's so many shared roots to the faith
yeah.
that it's like, okay, well, you know, now that's not to say that I know some of the guys we're going to talk about and some of the things we're going to talk about in terms of you know early church fathers and some of their things that they liked to write and say uh, doesn't necessarily get us out of that conversation. But yeah, I mean
It's
yeah, I mean in terms of yeah, that's yeah. I just wanted to kind of ask about that and see what your thoughts were in terms of that, given that we kind of drifted that way. But
what's the Methodist take on ransom theory? I don't
um,
actually use.
well, I mean, ransom theory is something that exists in the New Testament. That we have a bunch of biblical imagery in Old and New Testament for atonement images and redemption. So, I mean, it's once again, this is like one of those things that it's like a shared, like there's some commonality between the faiths, uh, but there is definitely no literal payment to Satan kind of model.
Yeah,
It's, it is entirely based on like our idea of and understanding of atonement redemption, ransom redemption is not ransom paid as in like the way we think of it today with like modern um kidnapping, that sort of thing. It's not that. There's no like we're not paying somebody off to be free. Um the idea is that the ransom is this is a liberation. And we tend to read it as a saving act of God freeing us from sin and death. Um and Paul writes about this quite a bit in the New Testament. I was just oh, gosh. I want to say what was I just reading from this past Sunday? One of the passages I was just reading from this last Sunday and teaching on.
one of them books. One of them
Yeah, one
books.
of them books, yeah, one of those letters, and it's probably like three or four of those letters. Paul kind of talks about this in the sense that like it's we are free from it's we're being freed from the wages of sin and death and fear. And so it's a liberation. It's not a ransom paid for that freedom. Well, it is in the sense that what is paid for that freedom is factors into the atonement system, the system of atonement through sacrifice, which we see as being completed in Christ. That's the main difference. There's no negotiation with like an accuser or Satan model where we're being bought out of hell. That is not a thing. And I would say probably most Protestant and even Catholic traditions.
Well, this is a really good segue then. Actually, like talking about liberation. We touched on this last week, but one of the things that I think it's a really cool thing. I mean, just from purely from just a theologian perspective. Um, the Christian fathers honed exegesis to shape not only the doctrine but support for their doctrine. which
Hmm.
highlights again kind of where our faiths diverge. Um, you know, and there are a couple of specific examples, and I think this is a really good one, is because to a Methodist Christian and an observant Jew, Exodus and Exodus Shemot thematically mean the same thing: God's deliverance and establishment of a covenant, God's
Hmm.
commitment to the people in the wilderness. Where the allegorical meanings are applied, the story is also absolutely a metaphor for Christ's redemption and the transformative power of faith. Can you elaborate for me what Exodus means to you as a Christian?
Hmm.
And if it
I
doesn't
mean,
if it doesn't mean anything, that's cool too.
oh no, it
It's,
absolutely does. I mean, and not just because of like not just because of like my heritage, um, but as a Christian, 100% it means. I mean, because we see a lot of typologies, right? I would say there's layers, um, because there's. So if I were to put it like this, right, it's a careful approach that we want to affirm. We affirm that Exodus is well. Okay, let me start over. I want to say this. I talked about like the idea of there being like an order to how we would perceive this, right? There's like a first order level upon reading that I would say if we're looking at this, we would affirm 100% that Exodus is the story of God delivering Israel from slavery. Exodus is the story of God forming a covenant people with Israel, and certainly God's presence is what is guiding and leading and sustaining in the wilderness and delivering finally into the promised land. Um, there then is a second level that we would say, like maybe from a like second order, that we would see like a Christian topology here, where we see we would look at that and go, okay, there's that bondage comparison to sin death. This is not a replacement, right? This is not replacement, but we see there's some imagery here that is called on later because Exodus is honestly one of the most quoted uh, New Testament scriptures. Well, I should say is one of the most quoted scriptures in the New Testament is Exodus. Uh, we have that idea of deliverance in the redemption, right? And we have there's like this sanctification journey, as Wesley describes it, that uh, that the Christian faith is not something that is done. The Christian experience is not something that is done instantaneously. It's not like a destination. It is a sanctification journey. It's a journey of becoming closer to God, becoming holy. And then certainly, obviously, the image of Passover is another level of that order, where we see, um, we see the Messiah's death as being something that saves us. Um, if I were to look at that and see those parallels, of course, we see Paul refer to that in 1 Corinthians 5. He refers to Christ as our Passover. 1 Corinthians 10, Israel's story is an instruction to believers in Christ. It is not anything other than, it is not anything less than an instruction. Certainly, it's not something that becomes enhanced or more or replaced. Um, and we get the imagery and that I use, like, say, for example, like we just did, I do communion first Sunday of every month. Uh, the communion ritual that we follow in the church draws primarily on the New Testament, but there's imagery in there from obviously from the Old Testament. We don't ever do like a Passover celebration. It not a Seder, like ever. Respectfully, there are people that do that in the Christian church. That bothers me. It's like when I see people at our annual conference who are wearing prayer shawl and they're
it's
not even they're not
I
even halalically Jewish. And when I challenge them on that, and they say to me, "Oh, it's okay," and I'm like, "No, it's really kind of not." Like, if we're going to be the people that we tending to be, and you want to talk about cultural appropriation, pal, like,
yeah,
no, like, get
on
that
one
off and
on one
leave.
hand, it's like I really, on one hand I was like, man,
Like, you
you
don't
get
get to play
points.
Jew for an hour. Like, It's
you
not
get points
okay.
for trying, but to me, it's like what they don't understand is that it may not look like what it would have looked like in the time of Jesus because it's been subject to
Yeah.
rabbinical editorializing for 2,000 years in parallel to their faith. But in a lot of ways, it would be like showing up with a Sikh dagger or
Oh
one of
yeah.
their
No,
headdresses. It's
exactly.
like it's.
Um, but
Although,
yeah, I
I
mean,
mean, maybe they do that too. I don't know. It's, nothing
well, like
surprises me.
looking at sorry, but looking at Exodus from a Christian perspective, I would say like the correct approach, and I think what is the historically correct theological approach is that we honor Exodus as Israel's covenant defining story. It belongs to Israel, right? But as a Christian, I also see a pattern of how God saves. So that's those are the orders of stuff that I see. Like we've got the original, we have the original story that is what it is, that it is the deliverance and it is the deliverance of Israel, and it is a beautiful story, and it should be valued as that. And then of course we also then see uh, that as a pattern of behavior in God that then we see then reestablished and almost affirmed, I suppose you could say,
Yeah.
that it's a liberation that leads to holiness. Ideally, I mean, the whole journey through the desert was that refining process, that journey towards holiness. All of it was God teaching the Israelites how to be His people,
A lot
and
of complaining. A lot of
a lot of
complaining.
complaining. Oh yeah.
That's what we do.
I mean, it's
Um,
great that we have this free food every morning, but it kind of gets boring.
yeah, gosh, could you send some hot sauce? Uh, so
Maybe some hummus.
hummus is yummus.
Yeah.
This Song of Songs, then,
Yeah.
now this is another one where this is one of those things. We go through the Torah cycle. We read it the entire Torah over the course of uh, Jewish year. Um, and there are times of the year that are prescribed for reading things like Song of Songs, but I have to tell you, none of these books are really truly central to daily Jewish life. And for a lot of my peers and I in my rabbinical cohort, almost derisively at times, and I don't I think we should I want to be a little more charitable about this. The average Jew is not really connected to a lot of these texts. So when I say this Song of Songs for us, I mean people that actually look at the text amongst us describes God's relationship with Israel for
Yes.
us. For
Wholeheartedly agree.
Christians, does is it the same for you? Does it depict the soul's relationship to Jesus as it does for some? I mean,
I mean, in the Christian tradition, Song of Songs is usually read as yes, it's read both historically as God, like that relationship with God and Israel, and then we often also read it as Christ in the church and Christ in our soul.
okay,
Uh, if I mean as from a devotional perspective, Christians often read it as something that is something that we can learn about covenant love. Um, that either Christ in the church or Christ in the soul, uh, we can acknowledge though, and I think we need to acknowledge that we have to read it with integrity as what it was written as, and how it has been interpreted historically. Um, if I were to look at that from like an early church father perspective, there's the Didache, which is, I mean, in the reading the Didache, that's like there's like that idea of a community that there's a continuity there that
hmm.
needs to be that needs to be uh, seen. Um, and then if we're looking at how, I mean, like, I guess we want to try and link this back to patriarchs of the church. Um, if I so like in both Exodus and Song of Songs, I would say like we see how some of the patriarchs and their writings will, some of them appropriate and do this incorrectly, and then others, I think, uh, set useful boundaries for how the church should read and use these in terms of relationship. Origin, of course, we talked about a little. Um, I think is good for looking at what methods can be good, but can also be looked at and see like where are we going to risk crossing an obvious line
Well,
that
those lines, I mean, it's easy for me as a Jew to be like, offended by the notion, but
right.
I'm setting that aside right now. Jews to a lot of these guys at that point were long ago and far away.
Mm.
Um, and they were, I'm trying to be charitable because, I'm about to really rip into Augustine. Um, but, at the same time, for these guys, like Jews were an abstraction in a text. And they're trying to form their own relationships with these texts. I think so. I'm not surprisingly, I find myself not wanting to be too hard on them for this because it's like
Yeah.
they're 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 building a faith in a sense. They're building something that's going to last the next 2,000 years. I shape the course of human history, uh, inarguably. And so it's easy to say, for me to say, oh gosh, they stole this, they purloined it, they repurposed it, but at the same time, it's like I also get it. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's
Well, no, I mean, I think it makes sense. I mean, with Origin, it's a great, he has a great name for what he did
yeah,
because he's like the foundation of kind of like modern exegesis when it comes to biblical theology. Um, and the problem is that, and this is where the risk comes into play, because inside of that biblical exegesis, you've also got his intellectualized supersessionalism that comes out and
yeah,
that he contributed to and heavily contributed to. And but that's not really necessarily on him.
yeah,
What he created and how he talked about it in terms of an exegetical perspective is greatly misused by the people who use his writings later.
yeah.
So it's not necessarily all his fault,
But they
but
plant the seeds. They plant the
they
seeds
play,
for
yeah,
anti-Judaism, and yeah.
exactly. Because then you see guys like John Christendom, like, I mean, dude,
Well, and
all wrong.
and there
Like,
here we are now. It's a I really, Augustine is, philosophically just somebody that I have a complicated relationship with.
yeah.
I his explorations in theodicy are things that I think every person should read and get into.
Well, I
Um,
think it's good to read him because his confessions
yeah.
is, I mean, like reading Augustine's Confessions is one of those books that I had to read for seminary.
Oh yeah.
Like having to read the whole of it.
Yeah.
Um, and it's interesting to see how he does a pretty good job almost of like a later Pauline kind of model of this is the life I lived before, you know, this is the
Yeah.
life I lived before. And so now I know why that's all wrong
Yeah.
and what I got wrong. And I'm like, that's great and all, but you're still like, here's the mark, and you're just like kind of like
Well,
just under it, like
Well, I'll roll him and Justin Martyr together in this one.
okay.
Augustine, I loved him for his theodicy. Why do good things happen to bad people? Where's
Yes.
God? Those are good
Yeah.
things, really good explorations. The problem for Jews, of course, is that he depicted us as children of Cain.
Right.
Uh, all our tribulations were God's punishment, and
Yep.
and that definitely set the stage for that damaging notion to persist across the years. Justin Martyr, another early church father, really integral to this discussion because he helped
Hmm.
define the applicity of Jewishness to non-Jewish early Christians. And
Yeah.
and I think he was the one that promulgated that originally, that idea that Gentiles were, you talked about this last week, olive branches grafted in. Uh,
Yes.
but circumcision no longer required, but the damaging part comes with Justin Martyr, that scripture no longer belongs to the Jews.
Right.
And he also was the one that created that wandering Jew motif that's been so harmful. Like, we'll
Yeah.
never escape suffering in human society because of the divine punishment for the death of Jesus.
Right.
Um, And and I know it's a challenging question. Uh, and honestly, there's no wrong answer. Like, I just is, you don't feel like you have to like shade this for me. What of that theology still exists in church doctrine today that you know of?
Um, well, let me run through a couple things because I mean, one of the things that with Augustine is like yeah. So, I mean, he definitely employs this harmful typology of that contributes to that demeaning kind of like witness framework that we see. And that's like repeated and then expanded on later by guys like Justin Martyr. But he also, at the same time, he's arguing against the extermination, forced removal. Um, like it's this weird, almost dichotomy. Like claiming, and he laid claim to the idea that Jews should be preserved as living witnesses to the scriptures. So, like, I mean, that was part of his thing.
He didn't know the
But he,
average Jew.
well, I mean, because here's the thing: like, even if protective, still harmful ideology. This theology that renders Jewish suffering as divinely mandated is problematic. I mean, it's become socially dangerous, and we see that later because people just take that and they're like, "Oh, hey, ball, run, play," right? Like they're going to go do that. From a theological perspective. Um, we see some of those same errors carried over into Justin Martyr. But like if I were looking at it from Wesleyan perspective, let's stay on point. I know I have like the cursive tangent. Um, I respect that. I respect Augustine's intellectual depth. Um, but as Christians, we reject. I would say as Wesleyans, Methodists, we reject this idea that Jewish suffering is some kind of divine mandate. Like we know that's not true.
The
We
Pope
know
got
that's not
around to it
true.
at some point too. So I
Well,
mean,
yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is that like there's plenty that, and this is the problem with kind of like where the church is at today, and it's never going to go away because it was a problem with Clement I,
yeah,
which is like some of the earliest Christian writings. And it was immediately a problem with Ignatius, and it was immediately a problem with Origen and Augustine, is that we see close but not quite. They're attempting to get it, and but the cool part is that as all of the pieces fit together, we get a much better and as scripture becomes more readily available and better translated, we see the truth come out that this is not a divine mandate. Suffering is not a divine mandate, um, despite what the church has tried to say, despite what the Catholic Church has tried to say, and even quite a few Protestants. That this depiction of Jews as inherently cursed is wrong. There's nothing in Scripture that supports that. Period. If it's not taken out of context completely to make it happen, and then this idea that, and then what ends up happening though as a result of that, which we also reject within the Wesleyan theological framework of Christianity, is we reject the idea that there's any kind of framework that would justify the social degradation of anyone, and especially the Jews. And the reason I say that is because one of John Wesley's biggest things that he loved was this idea of social holiness, and it's this idea that you can't truly be a Christian without living out your faith in every aspect of your life. So if I'm not fully being who I am in Christ everywhere that I am, I'm doing it wrong. And I can't do that if I'm doing these things, right? So, like, Paul specifically forbids Christians from boasting. And and the reason for that is he's insisting that God's covenant fidelity, I guess is the best way I could put that. His faithfulness in his covenants to Israel still exists. That if we try and do anything with Christian theology that normalizes Jewish suffering as something that God wants, it's so out of step with the humility that Paul teaches in his letters, and it's incredibly out of step with Christ. it contradicts everything at the core of the faith. So, you won't hear, ideally, you won't hear anyone that's coming from like the Wesleyan side of the faith teaching that sort of thing. Uh, you won't, and the only reason I know about guys like Ambrose or Jerome or Justin Chrysostom is because of having to learn about them.
No
You
doubt.
will
Yeah.
not you will not find them being referenced or taught about as part of any kind of in most Protestant churches. Let alone I don't even think the Catholics lean on them
I
from a
doubt it.
theological perspective because they're just so um, well, I mean, Ambrose is obviously like, I mean, he's later, he's fourth century.
Right.
He's more
He was a
post
contemporary of Chrysostom,
Constantine.
though. Yeah.
Yeah, he was post Constantine, very much state church, you know, getting in bed together kind of thing. And then of
But they
course
were,
Jerome, of course, we have like he's more like polemics and translation problems guy.
yeah,
Um,
and I have to say, and I think this was something that the book that I've been basing some of my questions off of touched on. Chrysostom, in being charitable to him, and I'm not inclined to do that. None of those people knew that at the time that they were saying what they were saying, that Christianity was going to become the
oh
dominant.
yeah, no.
No, I mean, they were all on the outside
Well,
looking in, and
in some cases, yeah. I mean, they were post Constantine though. So,
well, but then Julian, you had Emperor Julian, you had
right. I mean, you had the
Diocletian. They all
establishment.
murdered. They all murdered Christians even after.
Yes.
So
Even after, yeah.
yeah,
Well, because Constantine's, I mean, that was what, 385?
yeah,
385. So, I mean, I mean, you're seeing this right around his being named emperor. And of course, there's also the geographic problem of the fact that he's in what? He's in York in what is now the modern UK when he is named emperor. Uh, because they were on the Britannia campaign when that happened when his father died and he became emperor. So it wasn't until later that a lot of that statehood endorsed kind of religion begins.
yeah, and it
And
didn't take hold right away. I mean, it took a couple
no,
of emperors really to get in there after Constantine. So I mean, none of them
yeah,
knew. None of them knew where they were. I mean, these were mostly homiletic thing devices. If they were attacking Jews from the pulpit at the time, it's the problem. Nobody can ever forecast what's going to occur because of it. I mean, how would Chrysostom know that 1,000 years later that his writings, his sermons, his rhetoric would be used by, you know, later people
well,
to
like
like,
you could call them like later like anti-Semites because
yeah,
that's
yeah,
exact that's who you see quoting him most often is
yeah.
yeah. I mean, he's
And
not going to know that, but I mean, dude wrote, and this is my biggest issue with him. I mean, he wrote his against the Jews sermons. I mean, he wasn't shy about it. So,
yeah,
I
and
mean,
and
I think it's
Jerome,
okay to point that finger.
yeah.
Personally, I think that's one where it's like it's totally okay to point that finger at
I
him
it just
and
feels like
say that was not okay.
it feels like the church. I mean, this is what I mean. I guess the overwhelming thing, like, the church really seemed to have has grown past these aspects of things. We saw it with Vatican II. We see it with the definite philo-Semitism of definitely American Protestantism. I mean, I know the European Protestantism did not have a good track record with Jews, but where American as it evolved and grew here in the States, I I would be hard pressed to find more philo-Semitic people than American Protestant Christians. Uh,
Well, and a lot of that comes from the development of I would say the churches that stemmed from the children and grandchildren of the Anglican Church. Um, that in coming here, Well, you see in the split from the Catholic Church that there's already a rift over a lot of these things.
Yeah.
Because, you got a guy like Martin Luther who clearly sees that what is being taught is not what is in the book. And he lists his issues with that. He posts his thesis on the door. Then you've got a guy like Wesley who is fully inspired by is inspired by Martin Luther, but is not like in 100% agreement with him.
Right.
Um, and but takes when he brings what becomes Methodism to the United States, and that begins to grow here. Um, his theology, his theological perspectives on these things were already established. So I would say that in those movements, yeah, it's definitely more of it's definitely more of an American thing. Um,
Well, I go to Niemöller on this one. Like everybody loves to quote Niemöller, and
okay.
they love his poem about first they came for
Oh yeah, yeah.
the trade unionist and all that stuff, and then they came for the Jews, and I didn't say anything.
Hmm.
What people often don't know when they quote him is that he was really famously anti-Semitic himself, and he
Yeah.
comes from that European Lutheran tradition where he could have everything they said about Jews in European Lutheranism was the same anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic stuff that you might find from Chrysostom. Um,
Hmm.
and he was he himself said he was anti-Semitic, and you just we have our Father Coughlins in the United States. We have our folks, but they're always outliers. It never feels to me to be Christian anti-Semitism at this point never seems to be mainstream, except for a new strain, and I guess that's where I'm going with it. And that's the anti-Zionist parading as anti-Semitic parading as anti-Zionist
Yes.
leanings of modern denominations. And I'm going to put this to you because our rabbi the other day made a statement. One of the things Maine is one of the least religious states in the country. Uh, we very survey after survey, lowest church attendance, lowest interest in organized religion. But the secular theology he claims that Mainers, like blue state Massachusetts people, all relates back to the detached sense of congregation. I cannot talk congregationalist churches of New England, and that they still, whether or not they acknowledge it, they still have their origins in Protestant Christianity, particularly the Congregationalist bent. And I just it was a fascinating thing to me because I don't necessarily see that connective tissue. I think it's an outside influence of politics on faith versus
Hmm. Oh yeah.
faith. But I don't know. I mean,
Well, I mean, I see it so clearly in what is now the modern UMC. I mean, now granted, we're only 50 years old in terms of a denomination, um, or thereabouts. But I mean, it has the UMC. But the Methodist Church has, been around obviously for, you know, 150 plus years. But Methodist Evangelical goes back to early 1800s. So, I mean, it's definitely there have been some, wow, this is a thing to crack open. Within the UMC, I think where we see this happen is that there was a door allowed open for theological pluralism at the founding of the UMC movement in the 70s. Um, I talked about this, I think, in a previous episode um, with Albert Outler, who was the presiding bishop at the time. So that door was left open. What ended up happening then as a result is no final doctrine is set. So outside of adopting the 25 Articles of Religion from the Anglican Church, and saying like, "Hey, look, this is our theological heritage, and it's our heritage too." And doctrine, that's really kind of as advanced as it gets until we start building all the rules, inside our discipline. What ends up happening though is as time has progressed, is one of the things that we see within the United States is that politics has become the new religion. That we see science and I don't want to say this negatively about science because as a believer in God, I am also quite certain that studying the natural world that God has created and understanding it from a scientific perspective is not a problem.
Right.
So, amazingly, they can coexist. But at the same time, right? So science and politics have become new religions. And it takes just as much faith to believe in them as it does to believe in God, as far as I'm concerned. And,
I
especially
think
if
you're
you
right.
believe that a human is going to do the right thing. So if we look at the faith of politics that infected then the United Methodist Church, for example, and a lot of the Protestant denominations in the United States. So this is not just a Methodist issue, right? This is something that has taken over Lutheran, ECLA, ELCA rather, PCUSA, PCA, so Presbyterian Church, evangel no, not evangelical. Uh, Starts with an E, blanking.
Ec- yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
Eucharistic or something.
Yeah, they're those guys.
Yeah.
And like we've and there's quite a few denominations where you see essentially this faith of politics replacing this theology of politics replacing sound biblical doctrine and theology. And what ends up resulting in all of that is this idea that I have to do all of this. People won't like God. People won't be interested in what we have to teach unless somehow it agrees with the religion of politics. And so you'll in from a Methodist example, I would look at this and go, I mentioned social holiness earlier. Well, that sounds awfully close to the concept of social justice that we hear today. And that's often how it's used in the Methodist denomination today, because you'll hear people talk about, oh, well, we have to do this for justice and that for justice. But Wesley's original concept of social holiness had absolutely nothing to do with that. It
Uh,
had everything to do with living out our faith and what we believe in our everyday lives to the point that somebody would know who we are as a result of that, and it would impact the world. Now it's like the reverse. We want to fix all this stuff and make everybody feel happy, and then by doing so, hopefully they will find their way over into a faith, maybe. And if we make them comfortable and happy, they'll believe. But why? Because then what is the church actually offering that the world isn't?
one of the it's always interesting to me. One of the things that keeps me awake. We have the same kinds of challenges. The Jewish law is 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 relatively mutable to a
Yeah.
certain degree. I mean, except for what comes from the Torah. We even the Orthodox will claim that it's relatively static, but the thing about it is that it still has an evolutionary trajectory. My concern is less. If things change, it doesn't bother me so much. What bothers me is there is oftentimes we make the changes with no real attention to. We don't wrestle with it theologically. We just make the change.
Mhm.
Um, uh, and I think that we're skipping steps in a lot of this stuff. And I say we very broadly. I've had some really good conversations, we all know what we're talking about. I'll just name it explicitly. Things like LGBTQ issues and stuff like that. We wrestle with it. We wrestle with it theologically. We've been wrestling with it theologically. Um, and if it's not explicitly forbidden, we'll find a way around it.
Mhm.
But it's got to be a theological process in order for it to have theological validity. And my concern is that we just say, well, this is the prevailing cultural logic. Let's just do it. Well, I would whatever conclusion we arrive at, it would mean so much more to me theologically if we did it within the frameworks of our faiths and not just, well, here's the secular template. Let's just superimpose it and hope for the best.
Yeah.
It feels like a recipe for disaster. It dilutes, and I know that it's appealing to some, and by all means, they should form their own faith groups and do that. Um, but the problem is that it ends up taking place in things that are doctrinally important, where doctrine is important to others,
Right.
and in spaces where it becomes the dominant voice. Well, this you're no true Scotsman if you don't do it this way, and this goes in all directions. It's not just like
Yeah.
social justice issues. It's any issue. It's like
Yeah.
the
It really is
the
any issue.
velvet Trump pictures with velvet pictures of Jesus with Trump kind of stuff.
Oh yeah,
It's
no,
a
that's
it's a
equally as
continuum.
horrendous. That's equally as
Yeah.
horrendous as because yeah, there's no let's put it this way. There is no political party. There is no political let's put it this way. There's no political faith that
Yeah.
doesn't do this wrong. And so I will openly say that I refuse to mix the two because my allegiance first and foremost as a Christian is not to anything temporal. Is the best way I can put that. I I think what maybe has assisted this, and you put it in such a great way there. I watched this happen where the debate, rather than being theological, becomes procedural, where we're so focused on Robert's Rules of Order,
Yeah.
um, and making sure that we're doing everything correctly per Robert's rules that you know the exegetical work and the theological lifting that you were talking about, that never happens. Whether or not it's something that's actually biblical, regardless of issue, is never part of the debate. It's always, can we signal hard enough for whatever this issue is? And are we doing it within Robert's Rules of Order? And at that point, it becomes okay. Well, as long as we're all in alignment on the fact that this is written properly, then we can pass it. Nobody stops to actually ask the question, is it right? And when you do, oh my God, you might as well
You
break out the pitchforks and the you know the burning the get ready to be burned at the stake if you actually I and this is from personal experience, and I'll share this example. I questioned and I also pushed buttons. I will not deny that. I am a habitual button pusher. You know that. Um,
what? What?
yeah, what? Um, One of our annual conferences, I'm uh, an owner and aficionado of things that go boom, and there was an anti things that go boom resolution brought to the floor that I had read in advance. Was like, this is dumb. It does absolutely nothing. It solves none of the problems that it purports to solve. I mean, it was like, this is going to fix this violence and homelessness and suicide. And I mean, it was like all of the buzzwords were thrown into this thing and nothing that would actually solve the problem. Ironically, all of the things that the church is in a unique position to fix or at least help with. But we were so concerned with ticking all of the, am I talking about this right boxes, that we missed all of the, this is what we can actually do to help boxes. Um, so I proposed an amendment to this resolution that basically said I couldn't write anything that would actually change it or require money, right? Because Robert's Rules of Order. So I write an amendment that is several pages long and squeezes in between a couple of the whereases and therefores so that it's still procedurally correct. And it literally goes into this, and says, because we are uniquely positioned as the church and commanded by Christ to go into the world and do these things, we are positioned to address poverty. We're positioned to address hopelessness. We're positioned to address, and these are all of the core things that are root causes of the violence, whether against another or ourselves. And none of those things were mentioned.
That's
It was
hard.
it was all the these things are bad, ban this to fix it because it was politically advantageous and popular at the time. There was nothing there that actually spoke to the heart of the church, the heart of the faith, the heart of what the hell we're even doing as Christians. Like it literally meant absolutely nothing. And in presenting that, this is what I was awarded with 40 minutes of excoriation by various people in the room. I was labeled a racist, a bigot, uh, a coward, a misogynist, insane, a gun nut. Uh, I mean, and Dad was there,
Oh wow.
so he heard
Yeah.
all this take place, and I sat there and I took it.
Well,
And as because of Robert's Rules of Order, I can't respond to any of it because I was proposing the amendment, and of course my amendment was soundly crushed. But it was all honestly, it was mostly tongue in cheek because I just wanted to point a finger at exactly how ridiculous and what a giant nothing burger the stupid amendment even was. But it was like
yeah,
stupid resolution even was. It accomplishes nothing. And this is where like I talk about the faith of politics. None of any of what was written there had anything to do with the church, our faith, our shared faiths, our history, any of the things that we're called to do as a result of all of that. And all of that has supplanted what actually matters.
I tell you
And
that
it's very frustrating because it's history repeating itself. It's yeah,
the deeper I get into the theology, and you know this, I was someone that ran for state house several times. I don't have any, I don't hide it. I ran as a Democrat twice. I was very long time involved in Democratic politics. When I left Pennsylvania, I was invited by a friend who was a very ardent libertarian to join the Gary Johnson campaign, which I did because the dude is cool. I mean, he's all about weed and riding bikes, and that was, I mean, what's not to
but
love, right?
except
And
for
but also,
Aleppo.
yeah, he doesn't know. Yeah, what
He
is
does.
Aleppo?
What is
We
Aleppo?
all of us on his campaign died on the inside when he said
Oh,
that,
I imagine.
and
I imagine. Yeah.
because we all, I mean, he did really well. I mean, I think he still did the best out of any libertarian candidate in history. Um, And then I ran as a Republican in the state house race here in our district in 2018. And one of the things that I found over the years is that there's not a lot of distance between people. There's a lot shorter distance between people politically than they think.
Hmm.
And the people on the fringes will disagree, but I've always occupied a very middle of the road stance on just about everything. Um, Politically, especially when it comes to domestic politics. And
Right.
the further I get into going towards the rabbi, the less interested I am in politics generally. Like their policies of the day bother me. There are things like I
Yeah.
take a position on stuff, but I don't want my religion to reflect back politics. My rabbi at our synagogue will say, "I don't talk about politics from the pulpit because it's a yonaroo." Um, I agree with him, but I
Yeah.
also, our goal is like the politics. My gosh, if you lifted us and shifted us from now to put us in the Rhineland in 1000 AD or
Yeah.
Common Era, our concerns would be pretty much the same as they are today. Like, are my kids going to eat? Am I going to get killed by my neighbors? Yeah,
Yeah.
and really like all the other stuff kind of fades away. And that's not to say these things aren't important, but you know, we, I don't know that it's our job in religious circles to help people have. We're here to give them theological answers to the issues of the day, not political answers. And if they overlap, great. If they don't, they don't. But it's the best we can do, and I don't want to adapt. If somebody comes to me with a deeply held concern about gun control, I want to give them the Jewish response to it, which is very much it depends. And I, the one thing that I do like to point out to people, and I'm not a gun nut. I served in the military. Obviously, I've used guns in the course of my military work, uh, and it used to be that I'd be a little bit upset to see the open carry stuff at Walmart, after deploying overseas.
Yeah.
But but at the same time, there's one thing from a Jewish perspective that we tend to overlook, and that's that 1776, 1783, well, the first time in recorded history that for most Jews that we were allowed to arm ourselves.
Hmm.
And I think there might have been some freedom briefly under Napoleon or this or that Europe, but it was never a constant. And for
Right.
250 years, it's been a constant that we have the right to self-defense. And whether or not we choose to exercise that, it's a whole can of worms. But I do think that the emancipation angle is something worth thinking about as Jews.
Yeah.
And like, do I want to carry? No, I very resentfully do, because you wear a yarmulke in this day and age. I could give you the two examples of recently. You know, we have right wing anti Semites that are trying to build training camps for their race war up north, and then we've got we're I forget where we were this winter, like over our holiday break. Somebody came up to me, very sweet looking old person, and said to me, "Free Palestine." And I think they saw me wearing a yarmulke and they felt compelled to tell me to free Palestine. And I said, "I'll make a phone call."
Let me get BB on the phone.
Yeah, like he and
We
I,
all know each other.
yeah. It's like I I don't think anybody like that would ever commit harm against me. The problem is that there's this real very palpable sense that
Well,
we are
there's just
being
like an
seen.
implicit, there's an
Yeah,
overtone.
and I'm not afraid. I don't live life in fear, but
Well, no.
but I am, I'm just, I think it's prudent to
Yeah.
be prepared. And
Well, and I guess, I mean, I 100% agree with you there. And I guess where like I took the long way around to get to what I was thinking with that is this was like a modern example to me of like politics and the faith where like the faith has shifted away from uh we where we've shifted away from what's actually important, why are we doing what why do we do what we do, and what's important, and we and it is history repeating itself because I mean you look at any of the times where politics and the church have gotten in bed and the church is trying to make the church or even any religion is trying to make a government happy.
yeah,
It eventually turns sideways, and one upends the other. It's not good. And
no,
I guess where I'm at is more of a how to put it. I just really want to I really want to see I really want to see us, and why I love these discussions is I hope that it reveals to some uh, the fact that there's so much more than you can capture surface level. That to understand all of this better, you do need to understand the history of it. You do need to do the research, the digging. Not everybody needs to be a scholar,
right.
but we do need to look. We do need to dig deeper than scraping off a layer of topsoil and being like, "Sweet, now I can plant a garden." Um, it doesn't work.
Well,
You
our
know.
Perke Avot, the ethics of our fathers, one of the very famous Jewish book says, one should continuously study Torah, right? And I think the Torah, we're talking about Christianity. One should study these things, turn it over and over, turn it over and over, and for all wisdom is contained in it. And I think that's true of our traditions. And you know, don't be satisfied with the superficial. Open it up, tear it open, learn it. And I think that's what, people like us, we engage with our faith at a higher level, because we're compelled to do so, but also because we're hungry to understand more about our relationship with humans, but mostly the divine. And in so doing, we're able to better be ambassadors for the divine in the lives that we lead. And Jews, there's like this love-hate relationship with talking about the divine and our relationship to it, because it can seem trite in the face of large tragedies like the Holocaust. What's that joke? The guy gets up to this Holocaust survivor dies, gets up to meets God and tells a Holocaust joke, and God says, "Well, I don't find that funny." And the guy says, "Well, I guess you had to be there." And so I get it. Like, but this is why this is why we do what we do. Uh, we pour over these things we want to know, because then we can turn to somebody else and say, "Hey, I know you're wrestling with an issue like gun control and its
Hmm.
moral implications, its divine implications. I know that you're wrestling with sexual identity and these things, and where that puts you in the world. Um, you know, how better if we just go purely with the prevailing political answers, and the social justice, or the political conservative answers that we have coming in from the sides,
Hmm.
that's not the answer these people are seeking. They're seeking, how can I do this? What's the framework for me to relate this back to something bigger than
Yeah.
myself?
Well,
And
exactly.
I like whatever side. That's why it's like, as a centrist, somebody that I guess would be a political centrist, that's where the theology just always has to be what it yields to, and that's what we're always in pursuit of, the theological answers. So,
Yeah.
whither is God in all of this? And
Well, exactly.
well, we have exhausted another uh, hour and a half of each other's time here tonight.
Yeah.
Pastor Kevin, I really appreciate your time. Uh, what were
Yeah,
you say?
man.
Don't preach like my brother.
Yeah, exactly. Oh man, I love those. I love those guys. I wish that show was still on the air.
Oh, I know, the click and clack, the Tappet
Oh, the
brothers,
Tappet
right?
brothers. Yeah,
Yeah. So yeah, don't
yeah.
preach like my brother.
Don't preach like my brother.
Yeah. All
Oh
right,
man.
man.